Joining us for today's NSP webinar, Disposing of Difficult Properties. It's a webinar for grantees with disposition concerns or land bank properties. As the NSP expenditure deadline approaches, grantees are deeply involved in questions of disposition, of selling houses, but increasingly of disposing of houses that have not sold, as well as land bank properties. In today's event, we will review strategies and options for disposing of difficult properties, walk through live examples, and review past HUD guidance on disposition and demolition. In addition, HUD staff will walk through HUD's recent guidance on land bank disposition from their November 25th policy alert. So with today are practitioners from around the country. Please welcome from Lorain County, Ohio, Don Romanchuk and Mona Almobayed. From Greater Rochester Housing Partnership in New York, we have Jean Lowe. From Harmony Neighborhood Development in New Orleans, we've got Una Anderson and Charles Cutno. From the City of New Orleans, Les Colson is with us. From headquarters, please welcome back John Laswick and Paul Patterson. And hello to you all. And today's facilitator, Philip Bush from the Washington, D.C. Office of Enterprise Community Partners, will get started. Hi, Philip.
Hey, thank you for the introduction. Appreciate taking the time to present and for all of you who join us. We are going to go through a few items. We are going to talk about strategies for the disposition of difficult properties, as Ken just laid out. We have three wonderful local examples that we're going to go through, so we're actually going to talk with on the ground who've gotten this done and hear a little bit about how they've come at it and give you all a chance to ask them some questions and questions you might have. I'm going to turn things over and they're going to give us a little bit of information about the guidance they've issued, and again, give you all a chance to ask questions and get a discussion. Let's go ahead and start it. So before I actually hand things over to our local folks about how they've come at disposition of difficult properties, I'd like to just talk for a minute about the approach to thinking about how to deal with difficult properties. And this comes really from talking to several communities, that there's a common thread amongst those communities who are more successful at dealing with difficult properties. And it sounds somewhat like stating the obvious, but it's worth a few minutes just talking about. That approach really is they're spending time, they're understanding why having a difficult time selling the property or disposing of the property in the way they expected to. That sounds obvious, but often when the reaction when a property isn't disposed of or isn't sold when we want it to be, is, well, we'll just cut the price. We're asking too much. It doesn't work in this market. We're just going to reduce the price, and that's been a pretty common and pretty reflexive answer. And sometimes that is the right answer, but it really, I think, as we go through and you hear these local examples, see that more careful thought and understanding of why having a hard time disposing of a property is really helpful in actually addressing those properties. It seems to be generally two categories that when it's difficult to dispose of property, those properties fall in. One of them is that there's just a lack of interest. No one's making offers on the property. You're not really getting a lot of foot traffic. That's one group. The other group is you are getting interest in the property. That interest is either able to participate in the NSP program or actually isn't able to access the mortgage financing to close, or they can't consummate the purchase. They can't close. And we have here a couple different points that as we talk to the jurisdictions that are going to be on this presentation, other jurisdictions about how they've dealt with situations where there is not enough interest, and then on the following slide, how they deal with situations where there is, but that interest really isn't able to close the deal for one reason or the other. And so I just ask as we go through this to think different approaches and be thinking about what the underlying reason is, what is the problem we're trying to address when we're trying to dispose of property. Every property, each one of these situations is different. It's always contextual. If there was a standard, easy, one-size-fits-all way to do this, we would not be having a presentation on it today. But I think there is some patterns, and I encourage everyone to take a look at that. With that, I hand it over to Lorraine.
I'm Director of Lorain County Community Development, and I'm with Mona Almobayad with my staff and Ashley Scott from the City of Elyria. Lorain County received approximately $1,600,000 in NSP 3. In NSP 1, Lorain County received nothing directly, where the City of Lorain and Elyria both were direct recipients. So under NSP 3, Lorain County was in an interesting place, having been a state subrecipient. So we entered into agreements with Lorain and Elyria to figuring they knew how to handle their cities best and provided them with funding based on proposals that were submitted. And then the county continued to move funds around as necessary, as well as develop its ideas on how to acquire and rehab properties. A grant went along. And Mo actually did a lot of the work for us, and so I'm going to turn it over to her to let her go into some detail on what it was we had done.
With Lorain County, we did 3 rehabilitations on 3 different properties so far, and the City of Lorain and the City of Elyria did a couple other rehabilitations as well. So I'll focus on Lorain County's 3 specific properties, and it's kind of difficult to talk about the general problems and solutions because each property presented a unique set of problems and solutions. So I'm going to look at them one by one. Our first property that we have up here is 1031 West 4th Street. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because we just got lucky with it. Our first applicant, she was income eligible, she was credit worthy. So because we're focusing on disposing of difficult properties, I'm going to go ahead and skip over that one and move to 826 Lakewood Beach Drive, which is our second property. So we picked this property because it was in a really good neighborhood, didn't need much rehabilitation work, and because of the grant time constraints that we had when we were acquiring and rehabbing this property, it was advantageous for us to have a property that didn't need much work to be done. So with this property, the problem wasn't with a lack of interest. We had a lot of people interested in it. The problem was that, as I mentioned, it didn't need much work, so the funds were invested into the property were significantly less than what the market value was. I know that's kind of a unique problem with NSP homes most of the time. You put a lot of money into it, and the market value ends up being significantly less than what you put into it. With this property, we put about $83,000. The market value was $123,000. So because we used a recapture method, we had people who were disinterested because of the affordability period and soft second mortgage that went along with this property. A lot of lenders, they had issues because they did the soft second mortgage for their own specific lending requirements. A lot of the buyers, they didn't want to commit to living in the property for 15 years. And additionally, we had problems with the appraisals because many appraisers, instead of actually giving us a true market value, they validated our asking price, which was limited to what we had put into the property. So some of the things that we did, which worked out because we closed on this property last week, was that we made sure that everyone was on board, as real estate agents, the lenders, the appraisers, right from the beginning. So as soon as there was an applicant who was interested in the process, we contacted everyone who was involved and let them know, listen, there's going to be a 15-year affordability period on this. There's going to be a large soft second mortgage. We just want to make sure that you understand that these are the NSP requirements, and really there's no way to circumvent the regulations. So we started doing that. If people had concern about it, they would work with, working with the buyers to find another lending institution that would allow for the NSP. It was helpful to know that up front. Although it was helpful for the business to know that that's going to be what was required of them. Also, we made sure that the appraisers had a clear understanding of what we needed from an appraisal, that it wasn't a justification of the asking price, that the asking price was limited by how much we had put in, and that we needed a true value of the property. So in line with that, made sure we had good appraisers on board. We got referrals from people, and it was helpful as well. Additionally, we learned that you could review the appraisals, and if you had questions about one of their comparables or why they had credited or decredited a certain item a lot, you could ask them for explanations, and a lot of times they would adjust accordingly. Another recommendation is to make sure you're working closely with your HUD rep, and make sure you have a real estate agent, an aggressive real estate agent who is going to do more than the month. So moving on to that, those are kind of the problems and solutions we had with Lakewood Beach Drive. Move on to the next property, which we still haven't sold yet, but it's about to be under contract this week, luckily. It was 259 Oliver. One we picked because it was really available, it was in our target area, and we were able to get it for a substantial discount. And additionally, it would serve a niche clientele. It's a smaller home, so we thought that it would be good for a star family or maybe a retiree who's looking to downsize. The problem we've had with selling this property had to do with the actual home. A lot of people thought that the bedrooms were too small, and they had some questions about the basement. And also, when we purchased the price, we initially had thought that we were going to, after the rehab, the value was going to be much higher than what it actually turned out to be. So some of the strategies we've worked on were using references for purchasers to their credit score and basically follow small suggestions from our real estate agent that wasn't too costly for us but significantly improved the marketability of the home. So with that, those were problems specific to those two properties. I'm going to turn it back over to Don, who's going to talk about some of the general selling strategies.
For the county, one of the things that we were able to do as well, besides hiring a good real estate agent that was familiar with working with government entities, we are a little bit different, and not all realtors would adjust well to working with a government entity and government programs. We partnered with the City of Elyria, which was successful in moving product in NSP 1 and is continuing in NSP 3. Also our Port Authority, which had greater flexibility in being able to move property versus us, who on our own would have had to have publicly advertised and done it by auction, which would present some real problems when you're trying to sell houses with all of the HUD rules. In addition, we continued to work with appraisers and make sure that they knew what was being required, and we weren't afraid to question them if we felt that they were misunderstanding any of our directions. It wasn't that we were guiding the appraisal, but we wanted to make sure not only for ourselves, but for them that they knew was that they were doing and the constraints, and that we were always looking for fair market value on our appraisals. Many times we had to call our HUD representative to make sure we were doing some things right with the buyer and make accommodations to ensure the home stayed affordable. And then working with other nonprofits like the Urban League, local Urban League, LMHA, for not only pools of potential buyers, but then also they were service providers who would assist our buyers in improving their credit score and making them more able to access the credit needed. And then we were at every place we could think of with our housing flyers, with our realtors' information, and we're aggressively marketing using social media, websites, and all of our nonprofit partners as well. And so with that, the last thing was when we got the price wrong, our realtor pretty much weekly updates, and when she thought it was time to lower the price, we listened to her and did it, and that would increase foot traffic typically, which ended up landing us some deals. So in general is what we've done, and constantly working the deals as well in the housing. And
so with that, we'll open it up to if anybody has specific questions regarding some of those strategies or the properties. I think we have a couple minutes.
Hello?
Yep, you do have questions. Go ahead and raise your hand or submit a question in the Q&A box, and we'll circle back around to those after we hear from the other practitioners. So thank you very much, Don and Mona. And now we'll go to Jean Lowe in Rochester, New York, with another acquisition rehab example. Hi, Jean.
Hello. I'm the president of the Greater Rochester Housing Partnership, and the Housing Partnership is the organization that manages our Home Rochester program. Home Rochester has been around since, been selling houses since 2002, and we were able to take NSP dollars and fold them into the existing program. We had some modifications to meet the NSP regulations. In New York State, there were a couple parts of the state that got NSP funds directly, 1 and 2, but the majority of the NSP dollars in New York State went to the state's Housing Finance Agency, who then had a competitive process to make awards throughout the remainder of the state. The city of Rochester put together a pretty aggressive application. They were able to get pots of money to do some rental housing, some demolition, but they also were able to funds specifically for Home Rochester, and that took 2 forms. One in the form of subsidy to write down development costs, and the second to finance our funding mechanism, which is a pool of financing that's available for acquisition and rehabilitation. So the front of you shows little yellow spots, and each one of those little yellow spots is a Home Rochester house. When this map was put together in January of 2015, we had acquired 696 properties. We're now at 700. And of those 700, we've sold 657, and then we have a handful that are under rehab and a handful that are under contract and waiting to sell them. So this is a production program that operates just within the city of Rochester. We acquire vacant properties. Everything we look at is vacant. We do a full renovation, and then we sell the properties to first-time home buyers. We sell to families with income bands ranging from about 50% of area median to 120% area median income. We have a holding company called the Rochester Housing Development Fund Corporation, which is a nonprofit holding company. It arranges for financing, and it also takes title to the properties during the rehab process. There are 3 sort of major players in the RHDFC, the Home Rochester model. The first is the RHDFC itself, which allows for centralized ownership, financing, project management, legal services, standard specifications, and it identifies a pool of approved contractors. Work with community development corporations as our partners. Those partners are involved in the construction management, and for purposes of this discussion, they're our first line of defense in terms of sales. And the Rochester provides subsidy, provides financing for home buyer counseling, provides closing cost assistance, and does intake for purchase offers. So challenges in finding Home Rochester buyers is an ongoing process, and as I said, our first line of defense is our community-based nonprofit partners. These CDCs, which for the most part are neighborhood-based organizations, they clearly have presence in the neighborhood. They act as our construction managers, so they're with the property through the whole rehab process, and then they are our first sales agents. And that group of organizations already has existing relationships with folks who are living in neighborhoods. So it's sort of a friends and family way of selling property, friends and family of existing residents, whether they're homeowners already or whether they're renters. They are on site and they have signage out during the rehab process, so they're able to generate interest from the folks who are already in the community. So that's sort of our first line of defense. They act as the sales agents. They can make a fee, so there's a financial incentive to have them involved in selling the properties and selling the properties quickly. Second line of defense is realtors. If the property is not sold by the CDC within a 45-day window, we multiple list the properties with a real estate firm that we've entered into an agreement with. Those realtors are developing a pipeline of long lead time buyers, buyers who might have credit issues or who are only interested in a rehabbed house, or in the process of going through home buyer counseling. The realtors identify these people and work with them and sort of establish a pipeline of people who might be interested in our end product. We're finding that realtors in Rochester are establishing relationships with new Americans, and the family there on the picture is celebrating their purchase of their new home. They're from Nepal, and we're finding that new Americans are interested in our product, interested in a completely rehabbed house, and it's a good match for them. The third line that we go to find appropriate buyers is through homeownership counseling classes. They're city-sponsored. They're held by our local community organizations. The largest counseling organizations in Rochester are the Urban League and the local NeighborWorks affiliate. So they are running 3 or 4 times a year homebuyer counseling programs. We come in and talk about Home Rochester and the product, and those folks, if they're interested, come to us with a certificate showing that they've completed the homebuyer counseling, and we have the knowledge that they're an informed purchase, which is always a wonderful thing. They have also had an opportunity during their home ownership counseling classes to talk to lenders, so they've got an understanding of what they need to do to qualify for a mortgage. Next, we have a web page, which I encourage you to take a look at. It's called homerochester.org, and it has lists of the individual properties that are for sale. It has a map, shows interior features, and once a week we update that web page and we send out an email blast to all of the local community development organizations and realtors. We send it to the police unions and the firemen, the EMTs, teachers, whoever we can think of who might have an interest in becoming homeowners or have constituents who would be interested in having homeowners. And we usually have a teaser in that weekly email blast that talks about properties that are coming up and if there have been any changes in pricing. Final source of buyers is employer-sponsored homeownership programs. Several of our large employers, named universities and hospitals, have homeownership programs where they provide down payment and closing costs, and we meet with those employers to talk about opportunities that are available through Home Rochester. A challenge has been attracting buyers and mortgages to newly revitalized areas. So when you look at the original map that shows Home Rochester areas, you'll see that there are clusters of development when we have been asked to have this program operate in communities where there hasn't been a lot of investment in renovated properties or investment in new properties. We had to take sort of a longer-term look. In Rochester, they're called focused investment strategy areas. They tend to be fairly small neighborhoods where the city has made a determination that an intensive amount of labor and money will be invested in the community to stabilize that community and to increase the overall assessments for those communities. So this is a longer-term strategy. It starts with a relatively small area that has some assets, maybe an institution, an employer, or a particular kind of housing stock that makes sense to invest in it. The city addresses the physical condition of the infrastructure, repairing streets, putting in curbs, putting in lighting, putting in plantings, bus stops, street feature, those kinds of things. This goes through and does a selective demolition, and then does investment in existing housing, both homeownership housing and landlord housing, landlord-owned housing. Then there's often an infill with well-managed rental, even though it's pretty small scale, singles and doubles, and rehabilitation and sale of vacant properties. So Home Rochester comes in at the end when a lot of other investment has already taken place, and that allows us to get the appraised values necessary for the home buyer to be able to get their mortgage. So the picture that you see is a Home Rochester house, a fully renovated Home Rochester house, and then below is a new construction that we were able to put in one of our focused investment strategy areas after the selective demo had taken place. So to show you what that investment area might look like, and I'm trying to get my laser pointer to work. Let's see if I can get it. So here are the anchor tenants. This one is was a church and a school, and that's recently been renovated and is now affordable housing that has been developed through the use of low-income housing tax credits. This is an urban grocery store, which is relatively new, made a huge difference to the overall stability of the neighborhood. Dotted lines are improvements to major thoroughfares, re-outing, putting in curtain, putting in lighting. The purple spots are homes that are either owner-occupied or landlord-occupied, but have had a facade improvement grant so that they are in terrific shape. The Home Rochester property I showed you on the previous slide is right here. It's on Straub Street, and it was only after all these other investments were made that we're able to rehab that house and sell it. And then our new construction is taking place on this gray square. Came after the rehab. So there's been this steady progression of investment that eventually allows the property us to sell Home Rochester properties. I think back to you.
Interesting. Thank you, Jean. Quite an effort going on there in Rochester. And let me get Philip back in here. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you, Ken. Going through that was very helpful. Samples were really focused on acquisition and rehab programs, and we're going to hand things over to our partner in New Orleans to talk a little bit about how they dealt with land bank properties and how they've cut those and actually how they're keeping track of it. In New Orleans, we have an example both from a nonprofit who's been doing the work and the government partner who's been supporting them and helping work through the process. Let me hand it over.
Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Phil. This is Una Anderson in New Orleans, and I am Harmony Neighborhood Development's Executive Director and joined by Charles Cutno. Charles actually does a lot more than construction, and he's actually the director of real estate. So he is going to start us off with real conversation about this lovely house you see here on the screen. It was one of our NSP2 acquisitions. Harmony was a group of consortium members under the leadership of the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority. Redevelopment Authority was the grantee. We were all sub-grantees. Harmony was able to get slightly over $1 million, and that we acquired 30 properties. This is one of the lovely properties we acquired. Charles?
Yes. Hi, guys. Yeah. So as Una was talking about, this is a property that we acquired and put on a land bank. Put in for land banking actually. When acquiring this property, we knew that it was going to be a great potential to develop. It just didn't know when. We had initially invested in the area, built a couple of new constructions, about 8 new construction units directly in the area within a 1 or 2 block radius of that house. So we knew it was going to be an opportunity to develop. It just didn't know when. What the funding source would look like. So we decided to acquire the property, and through partnership with Nora, came up with a development. Our strategy was to use some the program income from the other units that we sold, construction, and then use that to help subsidize the development of that property. Yeah, it is a historic property, so we were required to keep a lot of elements were great. But for the most part, we were able to bring it up to the code and keep it to the new construction standards. That's pretty much the property at the construction. That property has sold its dams, which is before we were able to pull the last funds on the draw for that property. That's how much of the demand it had. We understood too that it was an old structure, and it, at one time it housed 2 families. And with the current market and the family size, we knew that it couldn't go in that format. So we decided to make it into a single, and not what we call a double, traditional shotgun house down in the law.
So that house and the next one you see, Charles kept the front and basically rebuilt the back. So it's what we call a historic prop-up in New Orleans, where you sort of keep the front facade and build a modern interior to the house at the back.
Yes, and the same thing for the most part happened with this unit here. We're happy to say that we actually closed on that unit a week ago too. It's the same thing. We work with the state historic preservation office to make sure that we were fitting the vernacular there, and they were informed about all our work. They were in agreement with it also. Once again, we looked at all possibilities and funding sources that would allow us to develop that. Nora was a great partner in that, which is the grantee of the NSP2 funds, which allowed us to take program income once again from another construction unit that we built and put toward this unit here.
On both of these houses, one of the things that was most important in marketing them is that we actually have an asset building program that works with potential buyers. You can come to us no matter your credit score, and we keep you in the program for pretty much as long as it takes. The buyer of the first house took years. Actually, it didn't take 4 years for her to get ready, but it met up with us having the house ready for her. And the buyer for 1621, which you see here, in the program about 2 years. So that is something that really real estate agents can't do, the credit remediation piece and preparing the home buyer. So we found that in the neighborhood we were working in, it was much more effective to create that capacity and, frankly, case management of the buyers in-house to ever list the houses. We tried a real estate agent and it just didn't work at all for us. So bringing buyers into the Harmony family, keep them in the program until they're ready to buy, has been very successful for us. And I heard someone mention friends and family, and frankly, that is the majority of buyers that we get come through a friends and family, word of mouth type of network. It really does bring a sense of community and network.
As you can see, that's the finished product of the unit. And we once again, we'll love to say we're really excited that a family has chosen a unit and has closed on it now. So a part of it, we definitely understood that there were some challenges with buying these properties. We knew they was going to have to go to land banking, but we understood too that there was other public dollars within the area. We can kind of use as leverage and kind of put a package together to get these developed at some period of time. We're unclear of when that time frame would be, but knew the possibilities did exist. Another unit that we acquired, it was right next to a new construction unit we built, for Victorian home. Unfortunately, we didn't have any more program income or other funding for us to kind of rehab this unit, but we knew there were other resources out there, and when I say resources, partners in a sense. So we looked and tapped into one of the partners that work within a different area with New Orleans, PRC, that does like more historical homes and renovate those, and reached out and see if they had any funding that could come across the area and come into our area in a sense to help develop those units. So as of now, they love to develop it. They're going through the process to acquire it. So at the end of the day, we're looking to sell that project, that the unit to them, so they can develop it with the same restrictions that NSP2 has placed upon it, the 120 AMI and below. So we're excited about that to get their units back into commerce through that strategy.
So we're selling it to them, and one of the things that has made them most nervous is, as the preservation resource, they are not necessarily focused on affordable housing. They're focused on neighborhood revitalization, even if it is market development. So they were nervous about finding an eventual buyer within the restrictions. So we have really offered to not only partner with them to sell the property to them, but find them a buyer for that property that meets the income restrictions. So what you see here is a map of really the remaining land bank NSP2 properties that we acquired. So we went in search of an experienced low-income housing tax credit partner and packaged these properties with their properties. Are in the process of applying for low-income housing tax credits. They moved the deadline on us. We were completely ready to submit. So we are submitting by the middle of April, actually the beginning of April, for the tax credits to do this project. It's 4 units. We are going back with 22 single-family units that are 3-bedroom, and 22 units that are doubles with 1-bedroom units on each side. Half of the project is veteran-focused. Anything else you want to mention on the LIHTC project, Charles?
As of now, the city is in total agreement with our plan. They're supporting this. We have received home funds from the city to help support the project and using the leverage for the LIHTC deal. And just, as of the last few years, there's been increases for affordable housing in New Orleans. Just with so much success, you also have some non-laws that are affordability. So our main focus initially was home ownership and still is home ownership, but we also see the increasing need for affordable quality housing in our area. So one strategy that we had in mind when acquiring a land bank property is knowing that in a sense we just hold them for a moment because the value is going to change, and most likely it can go into this type of deal.
With this deal, it really creates a ladder for residents to move into home ownership. We often get calls for rentals. We have 4 rentals under development, but no other rentals that we own. So this will give us sort of a portfolio of rentals where resident families can move into an affordable rental. We continue to work with them to stabilize their family financial situation and their credit, and can move then into a home ownership unit. So it creates that continuous ladder that we have always wanted in the neighborhood. This has sort of been our solution on the remaining land bank properties. With that, Phil, I think I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Una and Charles. Interesting stuff going on down there in New Orleans. We appreciate it. And they are off-site today, so they were not in their normal office environment. Thanks for joining us. And now we're going to Lois Colson, who will also New Orleans, who will tell us about what she does with rehab and land bank properties. Hi, Lois.
on mute. I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Very good.
Okay. Thank you. This is always surprising to me how interesting this can be. Get out of your bubble and see what everybody else is doing. These are wonderful presentations, and especially love to see Harmony on here. I knew they would knock it out of the park with some good stuff. I don't have a whole lot to say. I think I missed the boat a little bit about what you all wanted to hit here. I was going to talk mostly about land banking partners, which include Harmony. We at the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority received just under $30 million from NSP2, and a small portion of that is being used on land banking, partly because, and this is sort of an interesting take on what everybody else is talking about, trying to dispose of properties. NSP2 for us was sort of one of our mechanisms for disposing of land properties from the road home, which was the entity that bought properties after Hurricane Katrina here. So NSP2 was one of our disposition strategies to help get some of those properties back on the market, and we did that. We've include apartments. It's going to be about 460 units that will be back on market just from using NSP2 funds. And basically how Nora did that is we partnered with the folks that know what they're doing and know how to sell and rent properties, folks like Harmony. So we partnered with 14 developers who all got a certain allocation to do what they do best. I'm not saying it all went perfect. We're still selling some properties, but we've done very well because we relied on them to do what they do. But with that, let me just, because I promised all that organized this that I would talk about these slots, which I think of everybody else's presentation I've talked a lot about. Good stuff. I just wanted to mention the partnerships that I see happening and being considered for land bank properties that will hopefully get them back out on market, including what Harms went over with that beautiful house, which I have a picture of here later as well. Partnering with historic preservation folks. If you're in an area that has a lot of historic properties, then that's a good partner to get with, but they have to be willing to do the affordable housing piece, as was saying. Another thing that we're considering but haven't actually implemented yet is, well, not on NSP2 properties. We've done a lot of it on our road home properties, doing natural infrastructure such as rain gardens, different ways to facilitate the natural environment around you with vacant properties. So if you're not going to build on it, you might be able to do something else that's productive with it. Lot next door. Couple of those in NSP2. We've done a lot of those with our road home land bank properties. That's finding the adjacent homeowner next door who wants to make their lot bigger. And then also we've experimented a bit with some tax sale interest properties. So Nora expects to possibly land bank a few more, add to our larger land bank from NSP2 by purchasing some tax sale interest properties. What else am I? See, I'm going to forward here, Kent. Oh, here it goes. A thing I wanted to mention when I was talking about things is for this webinar is waiting from folks that are going to be good at land banking and good at getting rid of those properties in the land bank within that time period that we have 10 years after closeout. Obviously, stabilizing the properties that are in the land bank, especially if they have structures. Harmony knows this all too well. You've got historic properties, you can demolish them, but you've got to figure out a way to stabilize them. So you've got to be thinking ahead of time about where you're going to get those funds. Sometimes that's be from program income if you're lucky enough to be a partner that is selling properties in your eligible use E or B categories as well. Then you might be able to use some of that program income to help stabilize your land banks. I'm not sure how many other people set it up like that, but we did have partners that were doing a little bit of both. And feeling longevity, and what I mean by that is make sure that you have a strategy that you write down. So there's a lot of staff turnover, a lot of places, but even if there's not a lot of staff turnover, it's easy to forget why you made a choice you made the first time, even if it was the right choice. So making sure you down your strategy and why you're doing it a certain way so you can always go back to it and keep repeating that, and then the folks after you can carry on that policy guidance. And also obviously being flexible because things change even in a lot in the last 4 years since we started NSP2. So you'd be willing to hold on to the property longer or be ready to let it go even when you thought you were going to keep it for site control for other uses. And I collated all my pictures onto one page for you guys. I've got a lot donation, that big fence at the bottom, that's all that's trying to indicate there. I think these are the same houses that Harmony showed on Sarah. I'm not sure. They look very similar to those other ones. And then obviously in the right-hand corner, that's a land bank property that is hopefully going to partner with a developer soon to get it up to its former glory and out on the market. And the top left corner is just a vacant lot. But if it wasn't owned by one of our land bank partners, it would very easily likely be overgrown grass, garbage strewn, and not attractive at all. So at least now it's a corner lot. It's a high visibility, at least being taken care of, and it'll be that way until they figure out what they want to do with it. So I think that's I have to say.
Thank you, Lois. Also very hard work going on down there. Now it's time for Q&A, but don't go anywhere, Lois, because we just got a question from Chris saying regarding NSP2 side lot sales, how do entities develop a sale price for said side lot? And that question comes from Ingham County Land Bank in Lansing, Michigan. Do you have any insight on that?
Is that I take it?
I believe, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I believe, I'm trying to recall because it's been a while. This lot would be the appraised value of a vacant lot, I think is what was determined. And then there was, in a different program that wasn't NSP2, there was a partner program with the lot next door that allowed a discount in the price if you invested in term sort of aesthetic beautification measures, so making sure you got a fence up or planted some trees or some bushes, and you would get a discount on the purchase price if you did these things. And it was someone would go out, an inspector would go out and check and make sure they were done. So one way to help reduce the cost.
Thank you. Remind folks that we have 2 ways to ask questions. You can, if you have an icon next to your name, a phone or a headset, you can raise your hand to let us know you want to chime in verbally. You can also submit questions in writing, and we've got a couple more of those that are stacked here. Here's one for our friends in Lorain County, Ohio, and let me find Don's phone and unmute Don and Mona. A question from Leslie, who asked if you were trying to sell the properties at the appraised price or the total development cost.
We were on one property, it was total development cost because our appraised price was substantially higher. The other ones we were doing essentially at our market value because our development costs were substantially higher than the market value. So we had both in play. The biggest one, the more troublesome one, was actually when we invested substantially less than market value, and that was trying to get the appraisers and the homeowners to understand what was going on, and that was where Mona and our realtor had to do a lot of work educating.
Very good. Thank you, Don.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a question from, where did it go? From Alan. And this one is for Una. Let me get Una right here. And Alan asked, did you have any difficulty in New Orleans with education of the properties? And did that add to your difficulties in acquiring or disposing of them?
I would say generally adjudication is a difficulty. I don't remember if on the properties we bought, Charles, do you remember if there were actually adjudication problems?
No, all the problems we were able to find, we were able to get clean title and stuff.
The ones that we did acquire with NSP2, we didn't have adjudication problems. Probably because we steered clear of adjudicated property.
Thank you, Dina. Yep. Let's see what else has come in here. Let me go to Angelica's question. Can we sell the property for less divested and then it appraised? Is there anything we need to worry about with that, and how long could we go? And maybe let me get John and Paul in here for that question. And any other panelists care to chime in on that, just go ahead and unmute yourself if you are muted already.
Sure.
I was having some thoughts about the vacant lot. So I think it's a little different with a house on the property than with a vacant lot, because there are some constraints in the NSP rules, but generally there are constraints on the upper side of a sales price rather than the lower side of the sales price. So you could actually discount pretty substantially if that's what it takes to sell the house. We're interested in stabilizing the neighborhood, and if you get less income on a particular unit, you might still be doing a great service to the neighborhood. So the disposition regulation in the CDBG program says that you would dispose of property by sale, lease, donation, or otherwise. So that much covers any option that you would want in terms of pricing. I mean, you're going to have considerations of fairness, of over-subsidizing somebody, go too low on the price depending on the person's income. On the other hand, you might be able to reach somebody that's pretty modest, that's got a pretty modest income if you can get the price down. So those are factors have really more to do with OMB's concerns about not unduly enriching someone or over-subsidizing or whatever. I've seen, as far as side lot sales, pretty deep discounts on those. I think Detroit's got a million side lots, and they're not all HUD purchased, but I believe they're selling theirs for $100 each, with restraints, in terms of what you could do with them, or as Lois was saying, requirements to keep them rated or put plantees or other things. But I think the bottom line is that you have a tremendous amount of flexibility in how you price them and what you require in terms of subsequent uses in order to bring stability to the neighborhood.
Thanks, John. Here's a question that many of you may have a response to. Marja asks, what are recommended strategies for rehabbed properties that have since been vandalized? Who has, do any of you have experience with that?
Fortunately, this is Union and Charles. Unfortunately, we definitely have experience with that. So for the rehabs that we did, which were fairly historic, Charles went back and got the historical elements redated. We were not able to protect the houses from that, and they were, in some cases, in pretty bad shape by the time we were able to get to them.
This is an issue I've been to in a couple of markets, and I mean, ultimately, one of the big challenges we've had is when you do the repairs and when you do the repairs. I'm doing some work in Dallas. Unfortunately, we had properties that kept getting hit, so we stopped doing the repairs because the cost of continuing to do some repairs was excessive. It's very difficult to market a property to a homeowner if the property is not in tip-top shape. I mean, sales ready is an important requirement. What ended up in that situation actually was selling the property to a nonprofit who was that as a rental. So we actually ended up backing away from saying that situation. But I think it is definitely a situation, case by case, but it is a real challenge when you're not able to keep it secure, which in some neighborhoods you just can't easily do.
In Chester, we've developed a strategy with the police. If there's a house that gets hit over and over again, which does seem to happen sometimes, the police say if they're called to the site by a neighbor or whatever, they will often not press charges. And we've set up a system with the police where we identify those problem properties, and we ask that the police and be polite and ask people to move on, that they take people into custody immediately, and that we will promise to press charges. And so sometimes that's really harsh, but it sort of breaks up activity and lets people know that we're taking it really seriously, and can keep people from coming back to the same property. We haven't actually gone to court, but we have the police have agreed to actually take people into custody.
Thank you, Gene. Anybody else have to add to that vexing problem?
This is Paul Patterson. The important thing to remember is to make sure that you get insurance on the property. The NSP program will only pay for the repairs originally that are put in the property, and not for vandalism to things that have already been taken care of.
My experience with looking at properties in Miami is having a really mean dog in the yard seems to be really effective.
So, another question. I guess I'd love to ask a question of the folks in New Orleans and the folks in Rochester. It seems both of you made reference to neighborhood ready or a neighborhood being ready before you started to rehab or new properties online. I think you talked about plans concentrated development with the city, and Una and Charles, you talking about holding land bank properties and really assessing the situation before you started to do the development of those properties. Can you talk more about how you make that decision about when to start the process to bring a property to market? Are you watching sales in the area? Are you consulting with nonprofits? What are the triggers that lead you to decide this is now the right time to develop this property that we haven't been moving on previously?
So in Rochester, there has been a lot of acknowledgement from the community and a lot of work by the city of Rochester to identify these areas where they're doing focused investment. And the changes, the physical changes are pretty remarkable. So when the 10 houses on one short block have received a grant and the exteriors are has been remediated and they're in terrific shape, you start to feel more comfortable that you're going to be able to get the appraised value you need from the appraiser when they drive down the street. So unfortunately, it isn't a perfect formula, but when investments have been going on for 2 years and you start to see a change in the neighborhood, then that's when we've felt confident enough that we've gone ahead and acquired or completed the renovation.
In Harmony's case, we had done some new construction with NSP2 funds away from the two Saratoga houses, so that did help create more of a market. And in our home buyer pipeline, we found one strong buyer who was insistent on that location. So we're able to get a purchase agreement with her even before we began rehab of the house. Having a pipeline of interested buyers and knowing that they're interested in that location helps tremendously. I think there are some locations where we have really stepped out a little further toward that edge than our comfort level. That's just because we recognize that sometimes we have to create market in certain neighborhoods. We try to get a level of scale, sort of surrounding that NSP2 property to create the scale if we are trying to spark the market.
And also additionally with that, we monitor appraisals and the values. We do monitor that, see what's what, and see what we'll go forward. We pay close attention to a lot of funding sources that may come out with land bank properties in mind, saying that if we do go in and develop this property, and it's in an area that's right for transition, but not right there at the moment, there are incentives we may need to put in place so this property can sell, and that could be in the form of a soft-second individual who's 80% AMI and below, and then apply for that source, and kind of subsidizing that, and understand what that means for that property back in Congress, and continue to move in the direction that we need that neighborhood or that area to move in. Just kind of thinking about it overall and a large picture and view, and collecting a lot of data, but at the end of the day, all chance.
That's helpful. Thank you for talking us through that.
We can a couple more questions in here. Destiny asks about any recommendations the panelists or any of the other attendees might have on dealing with problem neighbors. We've had loads of showings and the house is priced right, but as soon as they see the neighbors, there's no interest. Nothing illegal going on. They're just intimidating.
But it sounds like this is the other side of the coins with friends and family. Friends and family can certainly be a real asset in selling a property, but like in the situation, it's you don't have any friends and family that are pulling people in. I know in NSP there were several communities I'd worked with where or at least initial sales have been made, and family actually of buying the house came to the new house and saw the neighborhood and really discouraged people from actually closing the transaction. I think it's like things you may want to look at is within the community for homeowners. Neighbors really are just, if it's the neighborhood as a whole and not just the immediate neighbors there, then you may need someone who already in that community is comfortable with it. If it really is just the immediate neighbors, it may be about building a relationship with them, which sounds like it could be challenging. I don't have experience with getting people comfortable with certain neighborhoods. I think that's a no.
That resonate with anybody else on our panel?
Well, in that I'm very sympathetic. It's a really tricky problem. I have a property that's been on the market for a while, and I don't think it's the neighborhood. I truly think it's the folks next door. And the only thing that we've been able to do, because the renters, not owners, is ask the city's code enforcement people to pay. You notice on code issue associated with the house, but of course that affects the owner, not really the residents next door. So trying to change things that way has proven to be difficult. It's a real problem. We don't have a solution for that one.
Well, has any other ideas that come to you about that? You can submit those at any time. Thanks for the question, Destiny, and we wish you luck with that one. And goes back to the vandalized property and really a question about eligible expenses. Can we make repairs or rehab after we've already done this once and then it's vandalized? What are the options to protect the property? Are there any conditions under which we can rehab it more than once?
Not with HUD funds. So that's why you'd want to have insurance. But if it's too late for that, you're really looking at local sources of funds for that, or maybe this house is not going to work for you either. So I mean, I'm not going to talk anybody into abating a neighborhood, but there could be some properties that are just not going to work.
I don't know if you can see it, but I have a question in a box.
Yes, so the one from Jennifer that asks.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump ahead. I just didn't know if that was visible to you.
Nope, that's good. Thank you. That's timely. Can you expand more on any unique issues related to tax sale purchases with NSP?
Yes, I can a little bit more about that, and it's a tricky wicket to deal with. One thing that I would say is you have to be sure, if you were going into a transaction like this, that you are very careful with the wording, because we didn't actually acquire, and that's the key word, any of these properties yet. The way it works, and I don't know if every jurisdiction is similar. This is a tax sale interest purchase. We purchase the interest in the taxes due. The owner has 3 years to redeem the property and pay the taxes. It happened with some of the properties that we did this with, and that return of the funds plus interest was grim income. It was sort of the intention of the original person who thought of this plan. It's like we'll some program income to use elsewhere in our NSP2 if these were redeemed. Now, all of them weren't. At the 3-year time threshold is passed, so we now have the option to go, I think, file a quick claim, but that would require getting clear title and going through all the noticing, so that will take a while. That's why these are thankfully eligible as land bank properties, because it could take a long time to get to that point. The other thing I would say tricky with them, and we haven't get this all the way through yet because we haven't acquired any yet, is the URA and the blanking on the environmental review. Could you make sure to get those done before you actually acquire the property and before you got to where you couldn't turn back? So those are things I would mention are unique issues to you have kind of a strategy for if you were going to go down that route.
Hoising asks, do you normally have an alternative plan of action, especially in terms of funding the rehab properties? The market and secondary funding sources are unfavorable or delayed. Anybody have plan B going into it?
Well, Ken, this is John. We're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I think that maintaining the properties in reasonably nice-looking condition is sort of a safety valve. It buys you some time. Now, from what we're hearing, of course, not all properties are going to stay in good shape, but if it's a land bank or if it's a longer-term hold. And we'll talk about this more in the next presentation. It's in your interest to keep them in good shape because that maintains their eligibility and could give you money in the long run, regardless of what you do.
I guess in terms of plan, I know Una and if you want to talk about it, sounded like for some of the properties you had acquired that you had a plan potentially of selling them and are now looking at a rental plan, so that kind of is the plan B as there's no NSP program income to fund their development. Was it always to develop them as rental, or is that something you fell back into?
We knew that some of these properties that we were looking to acquire, something we're looking to acquire, that there was a strong possibility that they wouldn't be home ownership units. It was very important to get them into commerce, though. So we did have a plan B to say, okay, worst case scenario, if this doesn't pan out, in certain locations that work better sometimes for rentals, that we would go after and put them in some type of rental project, preferably a LIHTC deal. So initially with acquiring those properties, we kind of asked that. I was kind of the property we were acquiring, had a discussion over what's plan A for, and then at that point, what's the plan D, even sometimes C and D, to be honest with you. And just kind of worked on those strategies. But of course, the community that we're in, we're working, it's constantly changing. And strategies have to be flexible enough to change with those changes. So it's a possibility that it wouldn't work on this round of the LIHTC deal, that we're not awarded on the LIHTC side of it, tax credit side of it. So then we'll go back to our book and look at it and approach probably developing portions of the property, depending on the additional public and private investment that's been made in certain areas, and do maybe a 2 or 3 cluster approach at that point. It will require us also pull additional funding from some sources, most likely outside of NSP2, to get that done.
When Tim talks on some of the rehab properties that are currently structured that are in the LIHTC deal, they were originally, and our first thought was to demolish them and new construction homes on those lots. The State Historic Preservation Office changed our mind. They basically told us no. So I would say on 2 of the structures we're rehabbing through the tax credit deal, that we're already on Plan B.
There are a couple more questions lined up, but we've had more time at the end, and we'll get to those questions. But now I'm going to turn it over to John Laswick to go over the March 14th guidance that was released. Go ahead, John.
So I kind of came to this webinar thinking that this is a difficult property. So whether they're being vandalized, but in the process, or in many cases, you've run money to deal with them in the short run, or the market in the neighborhood has just gotten worse since you went in there. So these are last resort kind of strategies, and I'm not going to go into all the different angles of for example, but you can demolish property, obviously, under eligible use D, and you can do it under as redevelopment under eligible use E for vacant properties, or as part of reconstruction under eligible use B, which is really reconstruction is really rehab, extensive rehab. So this is something that you might need to think about. I thought it interesting to hear the folks talking about how they really sounded like kind of demolished every facade of the house and rebuilt it, because that stuff was really functionally obsolete in the back, while the street view is gorgeous. As we've thought about this more over the years, we've thought about position being both the eligible activity and use, or eligible activity that lead to a different activity that meets a national objective. So if you, for example, demolish property for housing, so you've got demolition eligible use B, for example, and you come in, or eligible use E, tear down a structure that's vacant, and then rebuild another structure. The disposition really is just a way station toward the eligible use of redevelopment and the national objective of for low, moderate, or middle-income housing. On the other hand, it can be its own end use. You demolish a house that is blighted, dangerous, a bad influence on the neighborhood. Taking that out typically will meet the national objective of area benefit if you've properly documented the condition that's in. And the same thing is true with properties that you don't acquire that you demolish, and I think that's more the standard in this program. And so you can look at demolition as an end in itself or as a means to a different end. And so we've tried to just encourage people to think of how to trying to get. I mean, and the problem is that what you're trying to get sometimes shifts on you, as we've heard. You need a plan B or a plan C sometimes. But sometimes demolition is really not something you thought of when you bought that house. And that now that it's been vandalized and now that the neighbors are scary, you realize, maybe this isn't going to go. So you could demolish it and then come back a few years later and build a new structure on there. And the demolition is just, sort of buys you time to wait for the neighborhood to come around. I mean, I think that's what Rochester was saying, and I thought that was interesting, that you really got to kind of grow with, properties have to kind of grow with and move sync with the dynamics of that micro market, and you can't really drive it alone. You can affect it, but you can't guarantee an outcome. So I would just suggest that you think about demolition as a flexible tool, not one that you want to consider first off, but sometimes you can get so fixated on doing this rehab, despite the 5,000 things that have gone wrong, that you don't consider the fact that you could just take it down and wait for a few years and then come back and try again. And that's easier said than done, because in a few years you might not have the money, but if the house continues to be damaged by vandals and so forth, you're just losing ground. So say here the demolition or disposition have to meet the national objectives of housing, low-income housing, area benefit, jobs, or limited clientele, and we'll get into a little more detail on those. Can we get next one? Am I doing this?
Oh, you got the ball. There you go.
Thanks. All right, so I covered some of this. There's a little, Paul pointed out, there's a little typo down here in the lower right-hand corner. It's for 10 years of closeout, not 20 years of closeout. But the land bank properties, again, this is what we were just talking about, is something that you might want to consider. Certainly not, for historic properties. I mean, that would be a last resort. But if it's a, kind of average structure, maybe you just don't need it. Keep it standing. And then you got to deal with sort of an interim use, or maybe you've got a community use, community garden, or a side lot, or something like that you could use. I think when we get a little bit farther in here, you're going to see that it's possible to get out of any property in this program. The only question is how much it hurts. So. All right, so we're here again. We are looking at the idea that disposition can be an end in itself or be a means to an end. And so when you acquire property, you have to meet a national objective for the acquisition, and you have to meet a national objective for the disposition. And a lot of folks don't really, because if you buy a house and fix it up and sell it, it seems to happen all at once. But in reality, for some of these difficult properties, you're holding on to them for a while. So the first question you have to ask yourself really is, what's the eligible activity for the acquisition? And in many cases, that's going to be an area benefit national objective. And as I was saying earlier, you are, in order to keep up your eligibility for disposition to be an eligible activity and meet a national objective, you have to continue to maintain that property. So that's a long-term commitment, and it may or not really work for you, but we're a little bit later about what your options are if you can't dispose of it as an allowable expense and an eligible activity. But for example, you can sell a property as a public facility or an improvement for low, moderate, or middle income area, and that would be something like the rain parks that Lois mentioned, or a lot of the great stuff that the Cleveland and Cuyahoga area are doing with small-scale public improvements, walkways, pathways, that kind of stuff. That actually keep your options open too, because you have only created an eligible end use, but then you have a property that may, in some cases, have the ability to be reused. So that's one. As for special economic development, this is going to be kind of limited in terms of in terms of eligible use B for NSP 2 and 3, or eligible use E for NSP 1. But there are places where you could do, for example, under eligible use B in the NSP 2 program, you could acquire a house and have it turned into a neighborhood care center, for example. So the jobs there serve the neighborhood, and it would meet the element A national objective, and you could set it that way. That I think are pretty few between. So the next category is disposition as both an eligible activity and the end use. And here you got disposition for a side lot, and we've talked about this already. You're discussing of it, and we have quite a bit of sort of development of this thought. And what I would point out here is that we have decided that disposition of property as a side lot meets a benefit activity, because it doesn't just benefit the household that acquires the real estate, but if they're maintaining it, it benefits the entire neighborhood. And that kind of flows from the assumption, or in cases, that there was a house there that was demolished, and that was an area benefit, and then that area benefit sort of flows through to the next use. And some anguish over the years about how, do you have to sell it to a low and moderate income person, or things like that. And this interpretation solves that problem for you, because if we consider it to be an area benefit activity, as long as the area obviously is low, moderate, or middle income. And then you can dispose of a property for an ineligible activity that meets a national objective that you would, for example, use other funds for. And so we, you could just community garden or something like that. It's in NSP 2-3. It's not eligible to build that garden, but you could sell it to a neighborhood association or donate it to a neighborhood association, and they could build the garden themselves, and that's going to be typically an area benefit kind of activity. So this is our latest thinking on this, and thanks to Detroit and all the interesting things they're doing these days. And And hello, Marja Winter, by the way. Saw your name there. Former daughter. So that kind of breaks down the thought process a little bit more, and it's you thinking about meeting a national objective for both the acquisition and the disposition. And a lot of what you do will meet both of those. You acquire property, tear it down, fix it up, and sell it to an income-eligible person, and you've met a benefit for the acquisition and then a housing benefit for the disposition. If you're a land bank, or if you're a city that is holding properties, acting as a land bank, you have to continue to meet the objective that you got for the acquisition. So if you acquired a property, whether it's got a structure on it or not, and you are improving the neighborhood by maintaining the property, fixing the broken windows, boarding it up, cutting the grass, showing the snow and whatnot, as long as you continue to do those, you maintain the eligibility of that acquisition. And in fact, all those maintenance activities are considered to be part of disposition. So you're already kind of buying some time on the disposition. You're creating the ability to move a final disposition and meet a national objective, but in the interim you have this temporary use. So this is what I was saying before about how it's in your best interest to continue to maintain that property, because once you stop, you threaten to undermine the eligibility of the acquisition as well as the disposition. And so in those cases, you would be required to return all the funds that you've spent on the property, both to acquire it, do any repairs, and do any maintenance. And you don't want to do that in most cases. So that's why we talk about acquisition and delayed disposition. So you continue to own the property, and you can't national objective until you actually dispose of it in a final way, but you keep your options open as you go through that. So let's see here. There we go. Okay, so if you retain the potential to meet this national objective, maintain that the property's disposition will contribute to stabilizing the neighborhood, complete the environmental review process that was started when the property was acquired, because you didn't know what was going to happen, so you keep that open, and retain it until achievement of a national objective enables it to be considered for a completed NSP activity. So, a lot of times this is just a matter of time. We heard about these properties today. They were acquired 2 years ago. They're mothballed. And it may be another 2 years before you can really get in there and undertake those improvements. And so you want to keep that. You want to keep maintaining it. It's better. It's obviously it's healthier for the neighborhood, but it's also healthier for your for the economics of your program. So, and there's going to be properties where you just can't meet it objective for the disposition, or you don't want to. So I don't know if Marjorie remembers this, but we had a house in the Boston Edison area of Detroit. Beautiful neighborhood, but a tough neighborhood in a lot of ways. And the land bank, Detroit Land Bank, was in there fixing up the houses, doing a beautiful job. And they called me one day and they said, "Well, this guy that wants to buy a house, but he's over income." And I thought, well, damn, this is great. This is what we've been waiting for. People that actually want to live in here that aren't poor people. So that's a higher purpose, and you get the property out of the program for a reason like that, and then have to reimburse the program for the property's current market value, because you already met one national objective. And so, you know, if you've maintained that personal objective by maintaining the property, then this buys you the ability to sell it at current market value as opposed to all the money that you put into it. So that's usually an advantage. And then for properties on which the land bank grantee expended less than $25,000 for acquisition and improvements, not counting the maintenance, then you can take the property out of the program with no reimbursement to the NSP account. The requirement there is that you show your costs to the local HUD field office so they can verify that they were in fact less than $25,000. That number is an OMB sort of de minimis number, so it's the kind of thing that what a lot of your neighborhoods are like, but we've seen plenty of neighborhoods where there is less than $25,000 in these things, and you know, maybe somebody's going to build a new house. So that's an option for you. You don't have to be stuck with it. Now, sort of the worst case scenario, and again, maybe it's not too bad, is that it doesn't meet a national objective for either acquisition or disposition, in which case you have to reimburse using low funds the fund of acquisition, improvements, and any maintenance accounting administration. So, you know, maybe you may get to this point with some of these properties, and this hopefully it's not going to be all that expensive to you. I know that in the case of Detroit Bank, they had a lot of properties that I think most of the 100 and some NSP properties that they had a value of less than $25,000. So they're auctioning those off now on the internet. So there's a lot of variations there. So these are, you know, sort of complicated technical policy areas, and I've kind of rushed through them, but I'm hoping that there's questions, or if there is clarification that's needed, I'd be happy to take some questions.
John, we do have one related to the $20,000 limit. Jeff says that they've purchased lots in bulk. In one case, it looks like 29 lots. In another case, 15 lots, all of which are under $25,000 on average. But is the average cost used, or the?
First, you should get a broker's price opinion. We don't require appraisals unless it's over $25,000, but you need to have somebody tell you what an individual lot's worth. You know, you can't extrapolate from a bulk purchase, I don't think. But a broker's price opinion is fairly quick and not hideously expensive.
The key says that land bank lots for approximately $40,000 per property acquisition and demo. Private developers want to acquire them for little or nothing. There's no NSP money in construction. We're told deed restrictions will deter potential buyers. So can we ensure affordability via FDL to end to the buyers?
I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure what FDL is either.
Well, yeah, maybe she could write back and then clarify.
Okay.
If you've got $50,000 in a property, though, you know your options are more than this entire list. You basically you can take property out of the program by reimbursing NSP at the current market value. So if you've got vacant lots that you've got $4,000 into, and the vacant lot is currently worth $15,000, and you can get that confirmed by an appraisal or a market or broker price opinion, and the and the other people who are interested in it are willing to pay that price, then you can sell it to them, or you can make up the difference with local funds if that's something that you would want to consider. I mean, it might be worth it just to get out of the hassle of about it all the time. So that's probably your sort of most effective option. If they're not interested in deed restrictions, because with some sort of commitment to affordable housing, for example, there's no way you're going to meet that national objective.
Did clarify DL for forgivable deferred loan.
Oh, okay. So could you read that sentence again, then, please, Kent?
Yeah, we're told that deed restrictions will deter potential buyers. So can we ensure affordability via a forgivable deferred loan to end buyers?
Well, that might work. I mean, if you're going to get an income eligible end buyer, and the developer is willing to work with you on that type of a restriction, I can imagine that could work.
Andrea asks, if a nonprofit finds a buyer, including a religious organization, if paid an incentive, is the incentive eligible for federal fund reimbursement?
I'm not sure what they want to use the property for, so maybe you should clarify, because it sort of matters. Are you just selling it outright and they're going to do anything they want with it, or it's going to be used for religious purposes, or is it just housing and it just has to be owned by a religious organization? Those kind of matter to figuring this out.
So you could write in, Andrea. Here's something that John, you and or the other panelists may have something to say. Can you talk some about using lease purchase for a property that does not sell, or do you just go directly to rental?
Oh, no, that's a good point. I think that's an option. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but you have a little more flexibility in NSP than you do under the home program, for example, which requires you to sell that unit after leasing it for 36 months or 39 months or something. So, and that seems to be the big problem with lease purchases, that people can't, to the income level they want to get to in the period of time that is necessary. But NSP would allow you to set limits on that. And so, you've got to have the right buyers for that, though, because you've got to be somebody that's gettable within a couple of years, and that I think that's the hardest part, is really getting the right family in there. But it certainly is an option. I don't know. There's been quite a talk about it in NSP, and I'm not sure how much actually used. I'm sure some out there, but I think it was really as wide as people might have thought it would be earlier in the program, but perfectly legitimate.
Debbie's wondering if anyone has experience with properties acquired through the National Community Stabilization Trust that initially you thought was going to be possible, but due to circumstances, demo ends up being a better option. She says, it's my understanding that this is an option, but we currently have the need.
Well, yeah, I think people should write in or call in. I mean, I don't know what the NCST's rules are. As far as NS goes, I don't think it's prohibited. But I imagine that the trust might prohibit that. I just don't know.
This is Phil. John, my understanding is that the trust position has evolved over time as institutions that are transferring properties through the trust have tightened up requirements. They basically, applying greater requirements because the trust is not a marketing transaction to make sure that they're getting a mission impact. I think it's certainly, the person asking the question, I think it's certainly worth talking to the trust about why demolition is appropriate outcome and make a case that that actually is a positive outcome for the community. This is if there's a restriction here, it's not originating from the NSP regs, as John pointed out. It's really most likely originating because the financial institution wants to make sure that they are something for the community, and I assume the person asking the question has interest with the community in mind. They just are limited by what's financially practical. So I would suggest a conversation with the trust. I think it's something you can probably work out if you can explain why you're taking an appropriate approach.
Yeah, they're reasonable folks, and I think they might consider it on an exception basis. They're not going to obviously want it to happen a lot, but there's those situations where that really is the best option.
It asks, when neighborhoods are cleared for redevelopment, what percentage of the new development must be low or moderate income?
Well, I guess it depends mainly on the source of the funds for the clearance and the redevelopment. So let's say you've got this nice looking block in Rochester with maybe 12 lots on either block face, and for whatever reason you come in and tear those down and you use a combination of NSP money for 5% of it and local funds for the 75%, then you really only be, the local funds are flexible, you'd be required to ensure that 25% of the buildings, or 3 of 12, would be low, moderate, or middle income based on the source of the funds through NSP. We've seen combinations with home funds and NSP. Those are going to, home has tighter income restrictions, so they only have income restrictions, but theirs are 80% of median like CDBG instead of 120 like NSP. So you have to look at sort of where your money's coming from and really who's paying for the construction and do it on some sort of a pro rata basis.
Stephanie says that they purchased a house to rehab but had to tear it down. The vacant lot is in a low mod area and is now in a land bank. Does this qualify as disposition as an?
Well, so I don't know. It doesn't sound like it's been disposed of to me. It sounds like it's still in this sort of limbo of land bank limbo, and until you actually give to the next door neighbor or sell it to somebody or whatever, you are still waiting for the other shoe to drop as far as NSP goes. So if you've acquired it and demolished it with NSP funds, you've probably met an area benefit national objective. If you continue to maintain the property, mow the grass, and so forth, you could probably keep your hand in, and then, sort of your best option would be to sell it to somebody who wants to build a new unit, but that might happen. So then you need to look at other uses, such as community gardens and that sort of thing. Once it's it needs to be in use, and so a vacant lot really kind of isn't in use. It's just in transition.
How are the local government and nonprofits are successful in promoting lease purchase options for banking projects? I'm not quite getting that question. That makes to you, John.
Well, it sounds like you're asking about whether lease purchase has been a significant tool. I believe it has been, but that's just kind of anecdotal, though. there's a lot of communities that thought about it. Some have tried it. Some have made it work. I think you need probably a reasonably healthy economy, at least, for people to continue to raise their incomes, credit problems. So you need people who fit the right sort of model for that, which is that they are not ready to be bankable, but they would be bankable in a year or two through taking classes, through cleaning up their credit, possibly by increasing their income so that they're more bankable as far as the years go. And so it's kind of sort of a special mix that you need, but I think it's possible, and I think it's a good thing. It keeps the house occupied. You don't want the house to be sitting there. You don't necessarily want it to be a long-term rental because you don't have the ability to manage it, but you're still going to be managing it as a rental for 2 to 4 years. So you ask yourself if you have the resources for that too.
Looks like we're winding down here. Philip or any of the other panelists, or John, any words, any bolts of wisdom that have come to you since we last spoke?
Bolts of wisdom. I certainly appreciate everybody taking the time to call, and appreciate I think there were a lot of good questions, and of course all the folks from Worcester and New Orleans, Lorraine County, sharing what they're working on. It's NSP for a long time now. It's amazing to see the work that's still going on and the good things that have been accomplished.
Yeah, and I would say there's a way out of every property. So when people say, "Oh, you can't land bank for more than 10 years," well, that 10 years doesn't even start till you're closing that agreement. And so you have time, and you have. I mean, you might have great options, but you have some options for every property, and some of those options may be better than you realize if you think about short-term holding costs and so forth versus selling it to somebody that's not low and moderate income. So don't give up. Contact your field office. Right to headquarters, and see if we can help you through this. But I think as evolved, as a lot of this stuff has evolved over the years. I think we've tried to make it as easy as possible to manage and dispose of properties while still stabilizing neighborhoods as we possibly can. So I think there was a lot of fear and confusion early in the program about how we were going to get out of this, and from my perspective, I think there's pathways forward. Thanks.
Thanks to all of the panelists today. We appreciate your time and especially the efforts that you're making locally to make your communities better and do the best you can with the NSP funds that you're working with. Thank you for being here, and to all the attendees too. Just a quick reminder that when you leave today, you'll be automatically redirected to a SurveyMonkey form. We'd appreciate any feedback you would give us, and written comments are especially helpful. So thanks to all of you, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon on another NSP webinar. Take care, everyone.